The store was almost dark when I said it. Behind me, the last cooler hummed and one bad fluorescent tube buzzed like a fly caught in glass. The air smelled of cardboard and floor wax, the flat cold smell of a place that has been open too long. My hands would not hold still. Hers did. I looked at her, and my own voice came out flat and already defeated. I have to be married by morning. She did not flinch. She raised 3 fingers, steady as a candle in a windless room, her floral dress soft in the gray light, and she smiled the smallest, surest smile I had ever seen. Then, agree to my 3 conditions. My name is Everett Shaw. I am 34 years old, 35 in the morning, if morning ever decided to come. I live alone in the apartment above a corner grocery in Reno, Nevada. A 2-room walk-up with a radiator that knocks all winter. I have been divorced for 2 years. I have no children. Most nights it is only me, the hum of the coolers under the floorboards, and the sound of the town settling in around a store that has stood on this corner longer than I have been alive. The store is called Shaw's Corner Market. My grandfather Walter opened it before I was born, back when a neighborhood still meant the people you saw every day. He built the shelves himself out of pine that has gone honey dark with age. The floor is old wood, and it creaks in the same 3 places it has always creaked, so that I can walk the aisles in the dark and know exactly where I am by the sound under my boots. There is a brass bell over the door that rings whenever it opens, a small, bright note I stopped hearing years ago, and only notice now when it stays quiet too long. My father left when I was young. It was Walter who raised me in the back room of this place, who taught me how to stack cans so the labels face out, how to make change without a register, how to look a tired stranger in the eye and treat them like the most important customer of the day. And on the counter, by the register, he kept a glass jar full of butterscotch candies in their gold wrappers. It was always full. Every morning he filled it, and all day he let people take one for free: children, old men, anybody who looked like the day had been unkind to them. A good store should always be giving something away, he used to tell me. That's the rent you pay for standing on a corner people trust. I thought it was just a nice thing, an old man said. I did not understand yet that he meant it as a whole way of living. Walter died a little over 3 years ago. I kept the jar full. It was simply the last thing of his I could keep alive with my own 2 hands every morning. So I did. There are days the store barely makes its own light bill, and I still fill that jar first, before I count a single dollar, because some part of me believes that on the day I stop, the last of him will finally be gone. Next to my front window, there is a small flour and bread stall that shares my corner, and in the mornings the whole store smells of warm loaves cooling on a rack. I will tell you about that stall soon, and about the woman who runs it, because she is the reason I have any story worth telling at all. But first you have to understand why a grown man was standing in his own dark store on the night before his birthday, saying he had to be married by morning. My grandfather did not only leave me the store, he left me a trust, drawn up in his last careful years, and buried in it was a condition I used to find almost funny. To take full ownership of the market and the building above it, I had to be married and living on the property by the morning of my 35th birthday. Walter married young. He believed a man built a home the way he built a store early, and to last. When the papers were signed, I was already married, so the clause seemed like nothing, a sweet old-fashioned wish gathering dust in a drawer. Then my marriage ended, and the clause stopped being funny. The trustee, a careful old attorney named Harold Beck, who had been my grandfather's friend for 40 years, reminded me twice, gently, that the deadline was real and that if I let it pass, the property would go to sale and slip out of the family for good. I had made my peace with losing it. That is the part that is hard to explain. I would rather have handed over the only home I had ever known than stand in a courthouse and lie under a fluorescent light. I wasn't going to fake a marriage for a building. I had decided that, calmly, weeks before, the way you decide about weather. I had not counted on her. Her name is Cora Alden, and for 6 years she had been part of my store, the way the creak in the floor is part of my store, so constant I had stopped seeing her as separate from the place at all. She rented the little corner stall from me and sold cut flowers and fresh bread out of it, carnations and eucalyptus and dahlias in tin buckets, sourdough and soft rolls in a glass case that fogged up on cold mornings. She was quiet in a way most people are not quiet, not shy, exactly, but careful, like someone who had learned young that words spent carelessly do not come back. She came into the market almost every day. She bought small things, a can of soup, a stick of butter, a single lemon, and she always paid in cash and always said thank you like she meant it. She was 2 or 3 years younger than me, though the way she carried herself made her seem steadier than I have ever been. And here is the thing I have to tell you now. The thing I did not know then, but you will understand long before the man in this story finally does. Cora Alden had been in love with me for 6 years. I had no idea. I read her the way you read a good neighbor. I was wrong about almost everything. I know when it started, though I only pieced it together later. 6 years ago, in the spring, a woman I had never seen before came into the store just before closing. She was new to Reno. I would learn she had come here after a loss she did not talk about, the kind of loss that makes a person move to a city where no one knows their face. She set a single loaf of bread on my counter and a small bunch of the cheapest flowers. And when she went to pay, her card was declined. Then it was declined again. Her hands started to shake, not over bread, I understood even then, but over everything the bread stood for, the whole weight of a life that had come apart somewhere behind her. I did what my grandfather would have done. I told her the machine was acting up, which was a small lie, and I waved it off and said the bread was on the house tonight. And because she still looked like the day had been unkind to her, I reached over to the jar by the register, took out one butterscotch in its gold wrapper, and slid it across the counter to her without a word. She looked at that candy like I had handed her something enormous. I did not think about it again. To me it was a Tuesday. To her, I have since learned, it was the first kind thing that had happened to her in a very long time, and she never forgot it, and she never stopped coming back. She leased the corner stall a year later. She built a small life out of flowers and warm bread on the edge of my store, and every day she came in for her can of soup or her single lemon, and every day she said thank you like she meant it, and I thought we were simply two people who shared a corner. I did not see the way she lingered a half-second longer than she needed to. I did not see that she always came in at closing, when it was quiet, when it could be just us. I did not see how she watched the door on the mornings I ran late, or how she saved the first good roll off the rack and left it by my register without a note. I mistook 6 years of a woman loving me for 6 years of a woman being kind. God forgive me, they look so much alike from the outside. So there we were, the night before my birthday, and I had told her the way you tell a person you trust things you should not say out loud, that in the morning I would lose the store because I would not marry a stranger to keep it. And she had listened, the way she listened to everything, with her whole still face. And then she had raised 3 fingers and told me to agree to her 3 conditions. I asked her what she meant. She told me plainly. She would marry me. Tonight. It made sense, she said, in the flat practical voice of someone laying tiles straight. If your store goes, my stall goes with it, she said. I've spent 6 years building that corner. I'm not going to watch a developer bulldoze it because you're too proud to sign a piece of paper. This is just math, Everett. Your problem and mine have the same answer. And I believed her. God help me. I wanted the math to be all it was. It was so much easier to accept a woman saving her own business than to wonder if a woman might be saving me. So I took the deal at face value, the way a drowning man takes a rope without asking who is holding the other end. Her conditions were these. First, that no one could ever know the marriage had been arranged, not her, not me, not Beck, not the town. Second, that the store stay exactly as it was, the shelves, the pine, the jar of butterscotch on the counter, all of it untouched. And third, that we give it 1 year, and that at the end of that year, if either of us wanted out, we would walk away clean, no questions, no blame, no argument. She said the third one like she was doing me a favor, like she was handing me a door and a key in the same breath. I thought she was being generous. I understand now she was refusing to build a cage around a man she loved, even to keep him. We did it that night. There was no waiting period to worry about here. The county office was still open when we got there, its windows throwing hard white light onto the empty parking lot at nearly midnight. I remember the fluorescent hum of that place, so much like the store, and the sound of a candy wrapper somewhere in my coat pocket, and the smell of the wet carnations she had grabbed off her own stall on the way out the door, because she said if she was getting married, she would at least hold flowers. A tired clerk stamped our license. A civil commissioner with kind eyes said the words over us in a room the size of a closet. Cora held her own carnations. I held nothing but her steady hand, and mine, I noticed, was the one that shook. Before 8 the next morning, I walked our marriage certificate into Harold Beck's office and set it on his desk. He looked at it a long moment, then looked at me over his glasses, and something in his old face softened. "Your grandfather would be glad," he said quietly. He signed his part. The store was mine. The deadline died with the sunrise, and I went back and opened the doors and rang up my first customer as a married man, and it was the strangest morning of my life. Those first weeks, we were careful with each other, like two people sharing an umbrella that is really only big enough for one. She kept her stall. I kept my register. She moved a few things into the apartment upstairs, a coat, a row of books, a chipped blue mug she liked. We were kind and quiet and correct. And all through it there were these small moments I filed away as nothing. The way she filled the butterscotch jar one morning without being asked, before I got downstairs, so that I came into a store that already smelled of bread and found the jar full and did not understand the lump it put in my throat. The way she left a light on for me. The way she said my name. The way she never once, in all those careful weeks, took a single butterscotch from the jar for herself, as if that one candy were still mine to give her, and she were still waiting for me to give it. I told myself it was a good arrangement between two decent people. I was living inside the truth and calling it something else every single day. The quiet did not last, because the quiet was never going to be allowed to last. My ex-wife saw to that. Her name is Vanessa. We were married for 5 years, and I could tell you the whole sad shape of it, but all you really need to know is contained in the reason we ended. She had wanted to sell it for years. The store, the apartment, the whole corner, all of it turned into a number she could carry somewhere brighter. To her, Shaw's Corner Market was not my grandfather's life's work. It was money that refused to behave. When I would not sell, she left, loudly, the way she did everything, and I had not heard her voice in 2 years. Then, about a month into my strange new marriage, the brass bell over the door rang, and there she was. She did not come alone. Beside her stood a man in an expensive gray coat who looked at my shelves the way a butcher looks at a cow, and Vanessa introduced him with a bright, terrible smile as Dale Ferris. I knew the name. Ferris had been quietly buying the whole block for months, the laundromat, the shoe repair, the empty lot behind us, assembling the corner piece by piece for some glass and steel thing that had no room in it for a jar of free candy. Vanessa, it turned out, was working with him now. Brokering, she called it, finding him the pieces he was missing. And the piece he was missing, the last stubborn tooth in the block, was mine. He never once spoke to me directly. He spoke to Vanessa, in a low voice, about square footage and zoning and how quickly a holdout could be made to fold, and I stood in the middle of my own store like a fixture he was quietly pricing. I heard, "Congratulations are in order," she said, running one finger along a shelf and checking it for dust. Married. Suddenly, to the flower girl, of all people. She let that sit. Funny timing, Everett. Right before the deadline. almost like somebody needed a wife in a hurry. I said nothing. Quiet is the only thing I have ever been able to hold on to around Vanessa. If I open my mouth, she wins, because she is louder than I will ever be. She wandered the store while Ferris waited by the door, and she talked the way she always talked, filling all the air in the room. She reminded me that she had been there when Walter drew up the trust. She had read the clause. She knew every word of it. The marriage, the deadline, the ownership hanging on it like a coat on a nail. And she knew, because she had known me for 5 years, that I had not been seeing anyone. That I was not a man who fell into a wedding a month before a birthday by accident. She said it the way you lay down a card you already know is going to win the hand. Her perfume filled the store, sharp and floral and wrong, laid over the good smell of the day's bread, until I could not smell the bread at all. She stopped at the counter, at the register, and she looked at the jar of butterscotch, and her mouth curled. "Still giving away candy to strangers," she said. "Some things never grow up." She reached out and gave the jar a small, contemptuous nudge, just enough to slide it half an inch across the counter, just enough to say I could break this if I wanted. Across the store, at her stall, Cora went very still. She did not say a word. She just watched Vanessa's hand near that jar, the way you would watch a hand near something living. And I understood, in that moment, that whatever this was, it was not going to stay between me and Vanessa. It was going to reach the woman I had married too. Then Vanessa asked to see the back, said Ferris needed to understand the footprint of the building, the loading door, the storage. It was a reasonable thing for a buyer's broker to ask, and I was raised to be decent even to people who do not deserve it, so I walked Ferris to the rear to show him the loading door, leaving Vanessa alone by the counter for no more than 2 minutes. 2 minutes was all she needed. I keep the store's ledger in the drawer beneath the register, a plain cloth-bound book where I write the day's cash, same as Walter did. And folded inside the back cover, because I am a sentimental fool and could not throw it away, was a card on which I had written, in my own hand, the 3 conditions of my marriage. I do not fully know why I wrote them down. Maybe because when a thing is that strange you want proof it happened. Maybe because they were the closest thing to a vow anyone had ever offered me. Whatever the reason, they were there. In my handwriting. In a drawer, a woman who used to sleep in that apartment knew exactly how to open, in the time it takes to lose everything. I did not know she had found it until 3 days later, when Harold Beck called me and asked me to come in, and his voice was careful in a way I had not heard since the week my grandfather died. Vanessa had gone to him. She had brought a photograph, clear as day, my own handwriting, my own 3 conditions. The word arranged sitting there in black ink like a confession, and she had brought a threat wrapped as a favor. The trust, she reminded Beck, allowed the trustee to withhold the transfer for 90 days if the marriage was found to be a sham, entered only to satisfy the clause and not out of any real bond. She intended to prove exactly that. She would tie the whole thing up in a contest, she said, drag it in front of a judge, drag Cora's name and mine through it, and by the time it was untangled, the deadline would be a year gone, and the property would fall to sale, where, of course, Mr. Ferris would be waiting with a checkbook. "It's not a lie if it's true, Everett," she told me, the day it all came into the open, and she said it almost gently, which was the worst part. "You wrote the conditions yourself. I didn't make any of it up. A judge will call it exactly what it is." She spread her hands, reasonable, victorious. "I'm not the villain here. I'm just the one holding the truth, and the terrible thing, the thing that kept me up that whole night in the apartment over the store, was that she was not entirely wrong. I had written those words. It had started as an arrangement. I lay awake doing the math the way Cora had once pretended it was only math. And every column came out the same. She had a photograph, a deadline, and 90 days, and I had a certificate and a truth I had not yet admitted even to myself. She was holding the truth. She was simply holding it by the blade and pointing it at the only 2 things I had left my grandfather's store, and a woman I was only just beginning to understand I could not stand to lose. I went down to the store before dawn, the way I do when I cannot sleep, and Cora was already there. She had come down too. The jar sat on the counter between us, full, gold wrappers catching the first gray light, and neither of us reached for the switch to turn on the overheads. We just stood in the almost dark, the same almost dark where all of this had started. I told her what Vanessa had. I told her it might mean the store, that it might mean the 90 days, that it might mean her name in a courtroom for the sin of trying to help me. I told her I was sorry, that I had dragged her into a mess to save a building, and that if she wanted to take the third condition, the door, the clean walk away, no questions, now was the time, and I would not blame her for a second. She was quiet a long moment. Then she reached into her coat, into the small inside pocket over her heart, and she took out something so small I could not see it at first. She set it on the counter next to the jar. It was a candy wrapper, gold, old, worn soft as cloth from being carried, the creases nearly white. I kept the wrapper, she said. 6 years. I've been paying you back one visit at a time. And she told me. She told me about the night her card was declined, and her hands shook, and a quiet man she had never met told her the machine was broken and slid a butterscotch across the counter like it was nothing. She told me it had not been nothing to her, that she had walked out of my store that night and stood on the corner and cried, because one small mercy had reached her at the exact moment she had none left to give herself. She said she had gone home that night and written the date on the back of that gold wrapper, the way you mark the day a life quietly turns, and had carried it in one coat after another for 6 years, without ever telling a living soul why. She told me she had come back the next day, and the next, and that somewhere in those 6 years of soup cans and single lemons and thank yous, she had stopped coming for the bread and started coming for me, and had never once found the courage to say so. Not while I was married. Not after, when she told herself a woman who had loved a man that long had lost the right to say it out loud, that when she heard I would lose the store rather than lie, it had broken something loose in her. She said she had lain awake that whole night too, on the other side of a wall she had built herself, and decided that if she was finally going to risk her heart, she would at least dress the risk up as arithmetic, so that if I said no, she could pretend she had only ever been talking about her stall, that the arrangement had been true, her stall, the math, all of it real, but that it had been the reason she let herself say out loud, a true thing standing in front of the truer thing behind it, so that she could offer me her whole heart while pretending she was only balancing her books. I stood there in the gray light and felt the floor of my own life shift under me. Because as she spoke, I was not discovering something new. I was recognizing something old. Every small moment I had filed away as kindness turned over in my hands and showed me its other face. The full jar in the mornings. The light left on. The first good roll off the rack. The way she said my name. I had been in love with her too, for longer than I had let myself know, and I had been calling it an arrangement, because arrangements are safe and love, at 34, standing in the ruins of one marriage, was not. For one cold second I was sure I had understood it all too late, that a man only gets to see a thing this clearly on the day he is about to lose it. Then don't take condition 3, I said. My voice was not steady. Hers had been, all along. Now it was mine that shook. We went to Harold Beck together. And what defeated Vanessa was not a lawyer, not a clever argument. It was the truth she had tried to hold by the blade. The photograph proved the marriage had begun as an arrangement. It could not prove what the marriage was now, because the marriage now was real, and the whole town could see it. Beck did not need a courtroom. He had watched Cora buy her can of soup for 6 years. He asked the people on the block, and they told him what they had all seen before I had the flower girl and the grocer, the way we orbited each other, plain as weather. A start is not an end. An arrangement that becomes a marriage is not a sham. It is just how some marriages are brave enough to begin. Beck told Vanessa, in the flat, patient voice of a man who had drafted 1,000 documents, that a trust asks whether a marriage is real, not whether it was convenient, and that on the evidence in front of him, it was as real as any he had witnessed in 40 years. Beck signed the transfer and closed the file, and Vanessa's 90 days died with nothing to feed on, and Ferris took his gray coat and his checkbook somewhere else. And I never once heard my grandfather's name in that room without feeling that he had, somehow, set the whole thing up. And then, for the first time in my life, I had nothing to be afraid of and everything to learn. We did not fall in love the way people do in the movies, all at once, with music. We had already skipped that part by accident. What we did instead was much slower and much better. We learned each other, one ordinary day at a time, the way you learn a store in the dark until you can walk it by the creak of the floor. Spring turned into a hot Reno summer, the kind where the mountains go brown and the evenings finally cool, and we would sit out on the loading dock after close with the big door rolled up, drinking iced tea, not saying much. She taught me the names of her flowers, which ones lasted and which ones were only ever meant to be beautiful for a day. I taught her which floorboards creaked and why, and the story behind every dent in the old pine. We built a rhythm without ever naming it. She opened the stall, I opened the doors, and we passed each other 100 times a day in the narrow space between her flowers and my register, until one morning I reached for her hand at the coffee pot without thinking, and neither of us pretended afterward that it had not happened. Summer went to fall, and the light came in low and gold through the front window in the afternoons, and lit up the jar on the counter so that it glowed like something holy. And I started, without ever deciding to think of the apartment upstairs as ours instead of mine. She rearranged my grandfather's shelves once, and then put them back exactly when she saw my face, and we laughed about it for a week. Small things. All small things. That is what nobody tells you, that a real life is built almost entirely out of small things you would never put in a story, and that they are the whole point. I learned how she took her coffee. She learned that I go quiet when I am happy, not only when I am sad, and stopped mistaking the one for the other. We argued twice, and made up both times over a shared loaf at the counter after close. Fall went to winter. The first snow of the year came on a Tuesday. Fat, slow flakes drifting past the window and melting on the warm glass. And the brass bell rang all day as people came in stamping their boots and shaking off the cold, and the whole store smelled of fresh bread from Cora's rack. It was, I realized, somewhere in the middle of that gray bright day, coming up on a year since the night in the canned goods aisle, a year since 3 fingers and 3 conditions. A year since a woman held a fistful of wet carnations in a room the size of a closet and married a man who did not yet know what he had been given, which meant the 3rd condition had come due. 1 year, she had said. And at the end of it, if either of us wanted out, we walk away clean, no questions, no blame. The door, unlocked, right there. I had signed for it. She had offered it. And now the day had actually arrived. And the strange thing was that I had spent the whole year forgetting it existed, the way you forget an emergency exit in a room you have finally learned to call home. Somewhere in those 12 months, I had stopped counting days as a countdown and started counting them the way you count a thing you only want more of. I found her at the counter that evening, near closing, in the same gray light as the beginning, and I saw that she knew too. She always knew things a half day before I did. We stood there a moment, the two of us, with a whole quiet year between us and an open door on the table neither of us had put away. There was a silence at the threshold of that day that I will remember until I die, not a fearful silence, but a held one, the pause before 2 people who already know the answer let themselves say it. I did not make a speech. I have never been good at speeches. I just looked at her and said that the year was up, and that, as far as I was concerned, Condition 3 had expired, and that she was welcome to argue but she would lose, because I was not going anywhere, and neither, I hoped, was she. And Cora Alden, who had loved me quietly for 6 years and out loud for 1, looked at me and started, finally, to laugh, and I started to laugh too, and the tension broke like a held breath, and the bell over the door rang for some late customer, and neither of us so much as turned to look. The exit was right there, unlocked, for a whole year. Neither of us ever reached for the handle. That evening, as it happened, a young woman came in near closing that I had never seen before. New to town, you could tell. The look of it all over her, that particular tiredness of a person starting over in a place where no one knows their name. She said a few small things on the counter, and when she went to pay, her card was declined, then declined again. Her hands started to shake, and I watched a whole familiar weather move across her face, the shame, the doing of the math, the readiness to leave the bread on the counter and go. And before I could move, before I could say the machine was acting up the way I always do, Cora stepped up to the counter beside me. She told the young woman not to worry about it, that it was on the house tonight, and then she reached over to the jar, took out one butterscotch in its gold wrapper, and slid it across the counter to a stranger without a word exactly, the way I had once slid one to her. The young woman looked at that gold wrapper the way Cora must have looked at hers, once, like it was the first kind thing in a long, unkind stretch. She did not know she had just been handed the beginning of something. Neither had Cora. Neither, God knows, had I. I had to look away for a second, because I understood, finally and completely, what my grandfather had meant and what that jar had been doing on my counter my whole life, and how a single piece of candy given to a shaking stranger 6 years ago had come all the way around and back to save my entire life. I used to think Cora gave me 3 conditions that night because she was being practical. I know better now. Those 3 conditions were never a contract. They were 3 careful ways of saying a thing she was too frightened to say plainly. Keep our secret because I don't want to be pitied for loving you. Don't change the store because I fell in love with exactly this, exactly you, and give it a year with the door left open because I will never, ever hold you somewhere you don't choose to be. It only took me a year to learn how to read them, and it will take me the rest of my life to deserve them. I signed a piece of paper that night to save a building. What I was handed instead was the only home I will ever need, and a wife who had been quietly making it home for 6 years before I ever noticed the door was open. My grandfather said a good store should always be giving something away. It took me 35 years to learn the store had been giving me her one quiet visit at a time. So let me leave you with 2 questions tonight. Would you have agreed to a stranger's 3 conditions to save the only home you had left, or would you have let it go with your pride intact? And if someone had loved you quietly for 6 years, would you ever have noticed the small ways they kept telling you? If this one moved you, do me a kindness. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay a while, because there are more stories like this one waiting. And tell me down in the comments which of the 3 conditions would you have said yes to first.